For the most part, Clash Royale physics is pretty similar to real life physics, so that got me thinking, how realistic are certain things in Clash Royale compared to real life? So that's why in this video, I'm gonna find out whether or not things in Clash Royale actually make sense compared to real life physics. And before you get worried, all the physics I'm gonna reference in this video is not anything more complicated than high school physics, so you don't need like a physics major to understand most of the things in this video, since in the end, I don't have a degree in physics, so be mindful that I might make mistakes or certain assumptions to get around specific issues. And before I get comments about this, all of the math in this video is done by me, so please let me know if I've made any crazy errors. Before we start, there are a couple of things I want to get out of the way that I should make clear now so it doesn't get weird later. The Barbarian is one of the only normal humans in Clash Royale lore, and we can confirm this since they look pretty normal in Clasharama, including their height compared to other things in Clash Royale. So we can assume that Barbarians are probably around 6 foot tall. Since one Barbarian is around 1.2 tiles tall, it tells us that each tile is around 5 foot, so around 1.5 meters. Also, since all standard units in physics are in meters and kilograms, I'm gonna use those units and convert it to imperial units if I remember while I'm editing. So if anyone wants to comment down below the conversions if I forget, feel free to do so and I'll pin the best one. The other thing I wanted to talk about is card mass. Since I used a Barbarian for the reference height, I'll use it for our reference for mass as well. A Barbarian has a mass of around 4 in-game units according to this article. Since we are considering a Barbarian to just be a human, we can say they probably weigh around 100 kilograms, since the Barbarians are actually pretty buff, so they probably weigh a little bit more than the average person. This tells us that each weight unit in Clash Royale is equivalent to around 25 kilograms. But we do have to be careful since the movement speed of certain cards dictate their weight according to this video by Abdod. Also, we have to assume that all physical constants in the Clash Royale universe are the same as in real life. Now, obviously, there are some things in the game that completely defy the laws of physics. But essentially what I'm trying to say here is that we have to assume that gravitational acceleration is negative 9.81 meters per second squared. We also have to assume that there is no air resistance, since that would make calculations really difficult for me. The first thing I wanted to look at is the charge of a battle ram, and how much force it exerts when it collides with a tower. If we look at the battle ram from the center of its hitbox, when it's charging, it's moving at around 2.5 to 2.6 tiles per second when I look at it. But if we look at this video from Crusher21, he says it moves at 2.8 tiles per second.
Battle ram moves at 2.8 tiles a second.
So I'll use 2.8 tiles per second for this section. This means that the charge speed of the battle ram in meters per second is around 4.2 meters per second. And to be honest, this is actually pretty realistic, since normal human running speed if they run 100 meters in 15 seconds is around 6.67 meters per second. The entire battle ram unit probably weighs around 250 kilograms, since each barb weighs 100 kilograms, and they're carrying like a 50 kilogram weight while they're moving. This means that a fully charged battle ram has a momentum of around 1050 kilogram meters per second. In order to calculate the force it can deliver to the tower, we need to use change in impulse, which means we need to find the time it takes for the battle ram to go from full speed to 0. I looked at it really closely in my editing software, and I think it takes around 0.2 to 0.3 seconds for it to come to a full stop. This tells us that the force due to the change in impulse of a battle ram on the tower is between 3500 newtons and around 5250 newtons. I couldn't really find any reasonable context online, but the best I could find is that this is enough force to break the strongest bone in our body, the femur. But if we assume that the Princess Tower is just a building with a wall that's 2 bricks thick, this kind of force would be enough to cause serious damage to the tower. And to be honest, this is kind of realistic, since a fully charged battle ram can't quite take a tower down, but it can deal serious damage. But the Evo battle ram is slightly different. The actual ram itself has a whole Barbarian in it plus the mass of the ram, since we've seen it in this lore drop.
The only thing that can hold up to the strength of a Barbarian is another Barbarian. Now, in each battle ram is a Barbarian holding it all together.
And I've talked about the inconsistency of it in my video of lore inconsistencies, but this tells us that if we consider the entire Evo battle ram, it weighs around 350 kilograms, since we have to add an entire barb to it. If we use the same velocity as before, it tells us that the momentum of a charging Evo battle ram is therefore going to be around 1470 kilogram meters per second. The Evo battle ram's charge is so strong that it bounces back 2 tiles in a time of 0.5 seconds, before charging again. This time I'm going to use Newton's second second law to calculate the force exerted. 2 tiles is a distance of 3 meters, and the initial velocity is the charging velocity, so around 4.2 meters per second. The deceleration experienced here is therefore 40.8 meters per second squared. So the force exerted on the battle ram itself to experience such an acceleration backwards is 14,280 newtons. And if we use Newton's third law, which shows that the battle ram had a force of 14,280 newtons exerted onto it as a result of the collision with the tower, this means that the battle ram exerted a force of around 14,280 newtons on the Princess Tower itself. Okay, before this next part, I'm just gonna say this now, this is the best example I could think of, so bear in mind that it might be a bit weird. To give you some context, assuming that an elephant weighs around 5,000 kilograms, this is enough force to cause an elephant standing still to accelerate at 2.86 meters per second, which, keep in mind, is basically the acceleration of a human while jogging. So if you can imagine an entire elephant being pushed so hard that it begins jogging, that's what this situation looks like. I can't really think of anything else, so if someone in the comments has a better analogy, please let me know. And when the battle ram is destroyed, it takes around the same time to come to a full stop as the normal ram, meaning that its change in impulse is between 4,900 and 7,350 newtons. This is considerably higher than the normal battle ram. In fact, this would probably be enough to destroy part of the wall we were talking about before. So I guess this isn't that realistic, since the Evo ram does a lot of damage, but it's not enough to take the tower down in one collision. Something that I've always wondered is whether or not the flying machine is actually realistic. What I mean here is, do those tiny blades actually spin fast enough to keep the flying machine in the air? This here is the formula for the lift generated by helicopter blades. This isn't something that I'm super familiar with at the moment, but I have used this formula a while ago while I was still into aviation. So I've kind of forgotten how it works, but I'll give it a try. The first thing we need to calculate is the cross-sectional area of each blade. Each of its blades is around 1 tile long and around half a tile wide. Using our measurement of a tile as 1.5 meters wide, we can say that the dimensions of a flying machine blade is 1.5 by 0.75 meters. So the area of a single one of these blades is 1.125 meters squared. Therefore, the surface area of the blades here is 2.25 meters squared, since there's 2 of them. I measured the flying machine's blades to take around 0.4667 seconds to complete one full rotation. So we can calculate the velocity of the blades as around 20.196 meters per second using these dimensions, because we assume a radius of 1.5 meters. We also have to assume that the density of the air is around 1.225 kilograms per meter cubed, since we're at sea level. We also have to assume that the coefficient of lift is around 0.4 for the flying machine. When we bring all of these together, we see that the lift force generated by the flying machine's blade is around 225 newtons. Now, the flying machine weighs 3 Clash Royale units, which means that it weighs around 75 kilograms using our conversion. Therefore, its weight force is around 736 newtons, which means that in this situation, the weight force of the flying machine is so much greater than the lift force that it means that the flying machine is not accurate, as this force that we calculated isn't even close to being enough to sustain its motion. So that got me thinking, how fast do the blades actually have to spin to be accurate? Well, if we isolate v squared from our equation, we find that the flying machine's blades need to be this fast to even sustain its weight force at a minimum, which means that the time needed for one rotation in order for it to be accurate is this number. So I'll put on the screen what that looks like so it looks accurate. I really hope that Clash Royale sees this video and fixes the animation of the flying machine, because this makes the game literally unplayable. Something that I've thought about is, what would a Mega Knight spawn look like if it was in real life? Maybe I need to stop thinking about Clash Royale things in real life, because I feel like this one is pushing it. But anyways, the Mega Knight's card description says that he lands with a force of around 1,000 mustaches, which if we actually considered that number would be absolutely tiny. So let's actually calculate the force of the Mega Knight falling into the arena and see how many mustaches it would actually be. This calculation is actually really easy compared to the other calculations in this video, which is relieving for me, since I don't have to spend hours producing another one of those graphics. The Mega Knight weighs 18 Clash Royale units, which means that he weighs around 450 kilograms. So he's actually insanely heavy when you think about it, since the Golem is 500 kilograms. Therefore, the weight force of the Mega Knight is around 4,400 newtons. So I actually did a bit of testing with the Mega Knight's falling distance, and I think he falls a distance of around 20 tiles at his terminal velocity, which means that he falls a distance of around 30 meters until he lands. This means the work he does on the ground is around 132,000 joules, which means he is probably moving at a velocity of 24.26 meters per second just before hitting the ground. So I would probably say that he is definitely not surviving a fall like that, since even falling at around a height of 10 meters per second over a short height is enough to be GG for a normal human. But considering this dude weighs 450 kilograms, maybe he's not a normal human. I don't really know, to be honest. Let me know in the comments if there's another way for me to consolidate this landing velocity of the Mega Knight. Again, for this one, we need to use impulse so we can see his landing force. The Mega Knight falls and lands in around 0.3 seconds, which means that the force due to his change in impulse while landing is around 36,000 newtons, which without a doubt would be GG for the Mega Knight if he was human. And I can't believe I'm about to do this, but I'm gonna calculate the weight force of a single mustache. A single mustache weighs 4 grams, meaning that it has a weight force of this number. Therefore, we can say that the Mega Knight lands with a force of 927,000 mustaches, which is insane. Again, I hope Clash Royale adds this as a nice Easter egg to show the real force of the Mega Knight's landing. One thing I feel a lot of new players wouldn't know about is the fact that the Goblin Barrel used to deal damage when it landed back in 2016, when it was 4 elixir. Now obviously, the damage wasn't insanely high, but something that I've always thought about is what would a Goblin Barrel look like if it was thrown in real life? First of all, each Goblin weighs 2 Clash Royale units, which means that they weigh around 50 kilograms each, and the barrel itself is probably around 10 kilograms, which means the entire Goblin Barrel weighs 160 kilograms. If we consider a Goblin Barrel thrown to the Princess Tower, it travels a distance of 23 tiles in a straight direction and 5 tiles in a horizontal direction, meaning that it travels a distance of approximately 23.5 tiles. The Goblin Barrel takes around 3 seconds to travel across the arena to the Princess Tower, after being launched from the King Tower. The Goblin Barrel is thrown from the top of the King Tower, which means we can't just use a regular symmetrical projectile motion approach here, since it's starting from a certain height and landing on the ground. The King Tower looks to be around 3 to 4 tiles tall, so we can say its height is probably between 4.5 and 6 meters. We'll just go in between this at 5.25 meters for this calculation. So if we use these numbers for our projectile motion calculation, and also assume that gravitational acceleration is negative 9.81 meters per second squared, we can calculate the final velocity. The first thing we have to do is calculate the initial velocity, which means we need to find the vertical and horizontal components of velocity. To find the horizontal speed, we can just do the 23.5 tile horizontal distance divided by 3 seconds, which gives us around 7.85 tiles per second horizontally. And since we're not assuming any air resistance, we can assume the final horizontal speed to be around 7.85 tiles per second, which is equivalent to 11.77 meters per second. Then, to calculate the vertical speed, we can use the same equation of motion that we did before and rearrange to find u. Therefore, u is equal to 12.965 meters per second. Then, to find the final vertical speed, we can just use the formula for acceleration rearranged, which gives us a final velocity of 16.465 meters per second in a negative direction. Therefore, the landing speed of a Goblin Barrel is around 20.24 meters per second, which keep in mind is around 73 kilometers per hour. From this, we can also calculate the maximum height of the Goblin Barrel above the ground when it's thrown normally. Again, we can use the equation for displacement to find the maximum vertical displacement, which is around 8.567 meters off the ground. So what we have here is a 160 kilogram object reaching a max height of 8.567 meters off the ground and landing at a speed of 73 kilometers per hour, which if you were to see in real life would be insane. To be honest, I don't really have a good comparison, so I guess you can kind of visualize this normally, but just imagine a very heavy object moving at essentially highway speed. Not really, but I guess it's a nice analogy. The Fisherman is one of the strongest cards in the game if you think about it. This dude can pull an entire golem up to 7 tiles. The golem has a mass of 20 Clash Royale units, meaning in real life he probably weighs around 500 kilograms, if we consider our conversion of 1 Clash Royale unit being 25 kilograms, which to be honest is pretty realistic. Now, 7 tiles is a distance of 10.5 meters when I use the conversion of 1 tile as 1.5 meters. When a golem is 7 tiles away, I measured the Fisherman to take around 0.8 seconds to pull it towards it, and since the golem moves at the same velocity the whole time, we just need to find its average velocity, which in this case is around 13 meters per second. This means that while being pulled by the Fisherman, the golem has a kinetic energy of around 43,000 joules, which in this case is the work done by the Fisherman. Therefore, the effective force applied by the Fisherman during this is equal to 4,100 newtons, because we didn't even consider the friction of the grass that the golem is being pulled on. But I think I'll do that later just to show you how insane the Fisherman really is. And it makes sense, since the Fisherman is literally pulling a 500 kilogram hunk of rock around 10 meters towards him in less than 1 second. To give you some context, this means he can effectively deadlift almost 6,000 kilograms with these types of stats, which is 12 times the current deadlift record. So the Fisherman is secretly a beast. And yes, before I get comments about this, I am assuming that his pulling strength for something along the ground is the same as his strength to pull something vertically as well. If I've done anything wrong with that calculation, please do let me know. But what if we considered friction? Dry grass has a coefficient of kinetic friction of 0.5, which means that the golem produces a frictional force of almost 2,500 newtons. Now, if we take the net force of this situation being the force that we calculated before, then we know that the Fisherman is effectively producing 6,554.06 newtons, which is an even crazier number than before. And it shows you how strong the Fisherman really is, considering he's completely unfazed after producing such a large force with just his hook. The Hog Rider has one of the most iconic in-game sounds in my opinion. But something that got me thinking is the Hog Rider's scream really that loud that you can hear it from outside the arena? The loudest possible scream a human has ever screamed at was 129 decibels. So if we assume the Hog Rider holds this world record, then he probably screams at around 120 to 130 decibels. I'll just use exactly 129 decibels for our calculation. The bridge is 9 tiles away from the Princess Tower, which means that it is a distance of 13.5 meters away. Sound diminishes rapidly as you move away from a source, because it reduces by the distance from the source squared through this relationship. Now before we continue, I think it's really important to understand that the decibel scale does not increase in a linear way. Every 10 decibel units we increase by, a sound becomes 10 times louder. For example, a sound at 90 decibels is 10 times louder than a sound at 80 decibels. Keep this in mind when we compare the sound of the Hog Rider scream at the bridge compared to the tower. If we use 13.5 meters as our distance, we see that the Hog Rider scream is at around 95 decibels by the time it reaches the Princess Tower, which is in between the loudness of a drill and a motorcycle. So I guess you can kind of visualize that. So yes, the Hog Rider scream is pretty loud to the Princess Tower when he's deployed. But what about people watching the Clash Royale match? I want to calculate how far away a person can be from the placement of the Hog Rider where it's still pretty clear that the Hog Rider has been deployed. I think that a decibel volume of around 60 decibels is at the point where you could clearly tell that it's the Hog Rider that's being deployed, since it's just loud enough to disrupt conversations. We first need to find the sound intensity that corresponds to 60 decibels, and then from there, we can find out that the distance from the deploy of the Hog Rider where someone can clearly tell that he's been played is almost 800 meters away, which is actually wild when you think about it, and it kind of makes the Clash of Clans Hog Rider animation make sense. So yeah, I think it's safe to say that the Hog Rider in Clash Royale is so loud that you can hear him from almost a kilometer away. And to be honest, it surprises me that this part of Clash Royale physics is surprisingly accurate. I hope you enjoyed this video though. Thanks for watching.